And I'd like to present to you Lee Shanis here at the TAP Summit. Lee, go ahead.
All right. Thank you so much, Melinda. That was the most enthusiastic intro yet. And thank you everyone for being here and being interested in this topic of cultural humility. We are going to do a few small group activities. I'm going to have you do some reflection stuff. And this is basically like 6 hours of training kind of squeezed into an hour. So I also have a link I'm going to share for people who want the PDF of this workshop. So you can just put in your name and email and organization, and in a week or so, our organization will send you this presentation, because we don't expect you to remember everything, retain everything. The goal of this is that you walk away with one new mindset and maybe a couple of new tools that you can start using, and how you change a little bit how you talk about cultural differences in your program, how you reflect on them individually. Lots of things. People take away different things from this workshop. I've led this workshop maybe 150 times for very different types of groups, from a lot of adult educators, but also groups of accountants and bankers, and it's applicable to pretty much any field. So let's get into it. Before I start, I want to introduce a poem that we often read it before we talk about topics like race or equity or culture, topics that can be divisive potentially. So we talk about there's no such thing as a safe space, but really the goal is to create what we call a brave space. So I hope that you can use this poem. You'll get the PDF, and I won't read all of it, but it's a very powerful way, and just kind of one of many things we can do to help create an environment of openness and courage when we're talking about differences that can lead people to feel judged or like they don't belong. And that's not our goal. Our goal is that people want to belong and connect with their peers, whether it's in a ESL class, an adult English class, or amongst your team. So some of you might be thinking of this as far as like as a teacher with my students. Some of you might be thinking about this with your colleagues. So again, this applies to both, and it's kind of up to you to decide how you want to frame these conversations here. So the goals here are to reflect on your own lens. This is always step one, is starting with yourself. That's a big piece of what cultural humility is about. It's not about me learning about other people. It's about me learning deeply about myself. We're going to gain some specific tools to start shifting biases. We all have biases. We all have unconscious biases. How we manage those biases is very important. And this will give you the tools to interact with people who are different from you in lots of different contexts. And the big thing is increase your courage to continue these conversations. The easiest thing to do is to avoid conversations about race, avoid conversations about culture, but we don't move forward when we simply avoid conversations. So my hope is that this gives you some tools to have more conversations with people who are different from you. And again, this might be for your team, it might be for your classes. So the agenda is we're going to talk about some background, we're going to talk about words, we're going to talk about the difference between cultural humility and cultural competence. So over the years, I've led this training for about 15 years, and the focus for a long time was on cultural competence until I got introduced to this term cultural humility, and now that's really been the focus of it. And it's not an either or thing, it's really how do we combine competence and humility. But again, a lot of training out there is only focused on competence, again, which is more about what do I know about other people. I'll talk about some ways to practice and model it, and then explore some other tools. So, but first, who am I and what am I doing here? I'm the co-founder of a nonprofit based in Boulder, Colorado, where I am right now, called Intercambio Uniting Communities. I was the CEO or executive director for 21 years until almost exactly a year ago. I stepped aside. They have a new CEO. It's very exciting. And now I'm doing my own business and also still contracting with Intercambio to lead trainings and do things like this, which I love. So we started in Boulder in 2001. We created curriculum, and I wrote these two books, The Immigrant Guide and Pronunciation Fun, in 2008 for the first time. And then we launched a new version of Competence and Connections, the curriculum in 2019. And a lot of these conversations about cultural humility, we really wanted to reflect in the new curriculum. So I'm going to just allude to some things in there quickly. And then Intercambio also has our national network of organizations that use some of our tools and share ideas with each other. And Intercambio is based on what we call mutual learning or multi-directional learning, where it's not just teachers teaching students, but teachers and students learning together, and everybody sharing their perspectives and experiences. And this especially is applicable to cultural perspectives. So it's not just, hey, you're in the US now, you need to know these things. But what can I learn from you and your perspective and your history about these cultural differences? So that's one thing we're going to discuss here. And a lot of our program is focused on how do we build belonging and deepen connections in our programs, because that's why people stay, when they feel like they belong, when they feel connected. And the social aspect of what we do in our mind is equally or more important than the amount of language people are acquiring or other stuff like that. So we got our Boulder County programs. We've had 15,000 participants locally. And then we have our national programs, which we partner with hundreds of organizations, provide the training and curriculum and resources and coaching. We also have citizenship classes and some great free resources for those if you're interested. We offer these trainings to organizations. If you're here and you're like, oh, wow, I'm here, but nobody else from my organization is here, and I really would like to have this conversation with my team, we can do that. You can reach out to us about that. We have a program called Community Conversations, where we bring in volunteers to talk to our students, kind of speed dating style. It's an amazing program. We were happy to share that for free. And then yesterday, I think some of you might have been in my workshop about conversations on race and equity. We have free lesson plans for programs that want to have conversations about race. If they have videos, they've got vocabulary, some grammar. It's just a ready to go lesson plans for free. So if you're interested in those, let me know and I can send you that link. So that's a little bit about us. This is some more about the network. You can see more on the website, intercambio.org. So let's get into this. So why did you join this session, and where are you on this journey of cultural humility? I think I'm going to do our first breakout room and just have you meet a couple other people real quick and talk about what brought you to this specific session. So let's go ahead and do that. If during the breakout room you can put on your video, that would be excellent. If you don't have that capability, don't worry about it, but hopefully you all can participate. So I'm going to have you in groups of about 4 people. So each person can just share for 30 seconds to a minute. For some people, maybe this term cultural humility is brand new. Maybe you've been learning about it for years. Wherever you are, no judgment. It shows your humility that you're here to learn. So let's do this quick breakout room. If you can put your camera on now, that would be excellent. And or if you want to leave your camera off, that's also fine. So you can talk about what brought you here and where are you on this journey of cultural humility. Those are your 2 questions. Okay, I'll see you back here in about 3 minutes, 3 or 4 minutes. Ready, go.
For those of you still here, you should have a join button that you can click on. If that doesn't appear for you, click on the breakout room button down below and you might be able to join that way. If you're still having problems, let me know and I can move you to a room.
All right, let's see how these rooms looking. All right. Look, I'm going to pop it. Okay, there we go. They all have at least 3 people.
Okay.
Just going to pop in some.
I've got a couple people. Susie, Yvonne, Araceli. You can unmute to ask for help. That would be helpful. Or maybe you're not here.
That's okay.
Yeah.
I'm gonna just pop into a couple real quick.
Okay. For those of you still in the room, we've gone to breakout. If you're still in the main room and don't know what to do, please unmute and let me know. I can help.
All right. Almost all good.
Cool.
People coming back? All right.
It looks like it.
All right. I'll go ahead and close the rooms. Welcome back. For those of you back already, everyone else will be joining in the next 52 seconds. And if you are already back and you want to share something that emerged in your group, a theme, something you heard, a thought that came up for you, you're welcome to share in the chat. It's always good to hear what other groups were talking about or not. And then we will keep going once people are back. So
I think a lot of people are still talking, so because I only see a few people here that came from room 5.
yes,
So,
yes.
okay.
Well, did y'all have a good conversation in room 5, Kristen?
I guess we are quick chatters.
You're done quick.
Introduced ourselves and talked about where we're employed and the relevance of this topic for our job and personally. And
Great.
only 3 of us, so I guess it was a little bit fast.
Okay. Great. Well, welcome back, everyone. We're going to keep moving with the presentation, but if you want to share something in the chat that emerged from your group, a theme, something people are interested in learning about, a specific challenge that was, relevant for a few different people, you're welcome to share that in the chat. And we are going to keep moving forward with the presentation. So let's go back here. Okay. So again, wherever you are on this journey is great. If you're just beginning or if you're in the middle or you've been doing this for a long time, There's always more to learn. That's part of what humility means. So what does this not cover? This training doesn't cover everything. It's an hour, and this could be a 100-hour discussion. So we're not going to get into history or legal or policy issues or a lot of other important stuff. This is going to build your capacity to accelerate learning, but a lot of this has to be done on our own. So in order to practice true cultural humility, we must be aware of history, of oppression, of lots of things that, you know, relate to race and equity and culture as well. So, all right, now I want you to do a little activity with me. I want you to think about the following statements quickly, like in a second, and either raise your hand, it could be your virtual hand or your actual hand, if you agree with the statement. If you disagree with the statement, keep your hand down. And we're going to do these pretty fast. And again, don't overthink it. Don't be in the middle somewhere. It's agree or disagree. Just quickly and firmly agree or disagree. Okay, whatever your instinct is. The first one is, it's okay to ask people you meet, what do you do for work? What do you do for work? Is that an agree or disagree? Okay. All right, see a couple hands up. The next one is, all meetings should start and end on time. Agree or disagree? Okay, see a few more for that one. There are no right or wrong answers. I'm okay with silence during a conversation. Okay. It is rude to interrupt someone while they're talking. All right, see a few there. One invitation is a real invitation. So I'll explain that one. If someone offers me some ice cream and I want ice cream, am I going to accept the first invitation, or am I going to wait for a second or third invitation for ice cream? Do you accept the first one? Yes, you want ice cream. It's polite to say thank you if someone opens a door for me. All right. Saying hi to strangers is important for the community. You're walking around your neighborhood, you say hi to people, or do you not? Okay. Next one. Making direct eye contact shows that you are paying attention. All right. I see a comment that my hand doesn't work. I wonder if it's the real hand or the virtual hand. Good. And then the last one. If I am late for a class, I will enter the class quietly. My virtual hand. So it's awesome. Okay. All right. Somebody asked, is this a trap? I got you. You all failed this. No, there are no right or wrong answers. Part of this is whatever your response was, there are millions or billions of people who had a different response. And you're not right, they're not wrong, they're not right, you're not wrong. But there are differences, and we could dissect each of these and have a conversation for an hour about each of these at least. I've had conversations with my team, with different groups of people about each of these in depth. We're just gonna use a couple of these examples for this training to get into. And I'd like you to think about kind of what did you notice about your responses and thoughts about that first and the last one. So the first one is, it's okay to ask people you meet, what do you do for work? And if I'm late for a class, I will enter the class quietly. So I am going to put you back in the breakout rooms for a few minutes to talk about those two. You can pick one, you can pick both. You can talk about, why did I respond the way I did to those questions? So you're going to start this reflection process. So that's part of humility, is not just saying, well, I raised my hand for this and I think that this is right, or this is, what I learned, but like, why was I taught this? What is it about me that led me to that response for those questions? So I'm going to put those in the chat, as well as the form to get this presentation here. And I'm going to put you back into breakout rooms. I'm going to, let's see, I'm going to recreate them here. Just going to do 4 rooms this time. So you should have enough people. If you can have your video on. If not, that's okay, as long as you're participating. And I'm going to give you about 5 minutes to talk about this one. So those 2 questions specifically, and what led you to those responses. Okay, can I get some thumbs up from people? All right. Okay, I'll see you back here in about 5 minutes or so. All right. All right. Looks like they all have 4 or 5. Oh, you're mute. You're on mute, Melinda.
I was actually talking to myself, but the same 3 that were not going to breakouts last time are not going this time, so I'm not
That's
going to
okay.
try and move them.
That's okay.
Yeah. If you are in the room, and if you want to use this as your breakout room, maybe you're on an iPad and you can't find the breakout room, you could type your answers in the chat.
There it is. Plug in my computer. Morning.
And Lee, just to let you know, Araceli did text me that she's with a student right now, so she's kind of double teaming. So
Okay. Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
one person anyway.
Yeah. That's usually part of what's going on. Okay. Let's see. I'm gonna pop into.
Hi, Maureen. Everyone's in a breakout. I can move you to one. They're discussing some questions. It's very open, so, or you could stay here. What is your preference?
In a breakout would be great. Thank you.
All righty. Let me see if I can. Yeah, we go. You're going to be going to room 2. Should have a little button that says join. There we go. I like that. 1 minute warning in 2 minutes. Very good.
Yep. Make them do some math. All righty. On time. All right, welcome back. See, one group has re-entered. Again, if you have anything in the chat you want to share about what came up in that conversation, something interesting you heard, a theme that came up, anything you would like to share, please include that. Not always this. Still looking at some of the chat from the last conversation. Right here, let's share the screen again. All right. Okay, great. I think everybody is back. How was that conversation? Good. All right, excellent. I didn't get to pop into all of them, so I just throw you into those rooms and hope that you're talking to each other and learning from each other. If you want to share anything in the chat that came up as a theme or something interesting you heard or an interesting reflection you had, please do share that in the chat. That is helpful for everyone if we share some of what we're learning throughout this with each other. And we don't have time to do a full large group discussion until the end. So I'll kind of share some things I've learned about those two questions real quick. So one, it's okay to ask people you meet, what do you do for work? For me, I always thought that was just a question that I could ask everyone, and it was not offensive or thought of as something bad for anyone. Until I read a book about white privilege, and it said that is a kind of middle to upper class white privilege question that a lot of people have never thought about as being potentially offensive or something people don't want to answer. And I was like, oh, yeah, I guess I never thought about it. So for some people, it's just a get to know you question. For others, it's, don't ask me that immediately as a way to get to know me, right? That doesn't identify who I am. And a lot of times we judge people according to what they do for work. So there's other ways we can ask a question similar, like, how do you spend your time, or what's your story, and leave it open for people to answer in a way that's more comfortable to them, the way that they want to share, this is who I am. So, but at the same time, if you're at a networking event, is it okay to ask people, what do you do for work? Yeah, of course, because that's what people are there to learn. What does everyone do for work? So it depends on the environment. It depends who you're with. It depends on a lot of things. But in general, I've gone on this journey of realizing that question can mean different things to different people. So yeah, somebody in the chat said, you notice that our sharing depended on the environment, the experience, our upbringing, our cultural background. Yeah, a lot of this is about our upbringing. What were we taught when we were kids? What were we taught about time? What were we taught about, asking get to know you questions? What were we taught about things we shouldn't ask people? What were we taught about saying thank you? What were we taught about saying hi? So yeah, a lot of these are upbringing, and that's a lot of cultural stuff. What about the other one? If I'm late for a class, I will enter the class quietly. that is a big one that a lot of adult educators have experienced, where students come in late, and rather than sit quietly at their desk, they'll greet each student individually. And I've heard many teachers say, oh my God, Lee, that's so frustrating. They come in late and then they don't just sit quietly at their desk, they interrupt the class, they disrupt the class. And why does that happen? Why do students do that? Does anyone know? Why do students, many of our students, rather than sit quietly, greet their peers before sitting down? All right. So yeah, it's a cultural difference. For a lot of them, it's rude to sit quietly without greeting their peers. For me, what I was brought up thinking is it's rude to disrupt the class and greet your peers. So we have these two very different ways of seeing the same behavior. One is it's rude to do this, and one is it's polite to do this. So an important thing to do is have the conversation about it. We can't just ignore these conversations. And even as teachers, if we're like, okay, I get it, this is polite for some people, there might even be still people in your class who aren't okay with it, right? So having the conversation, setting expectations around these cultural differences will help, turn potential conflicts into productive conversations where everyone's learning about these differences. So let's keep going here. Why do we not have conversations about culture? We're afraid to say the wrong thing, right? We're afraid to use the wrong words. We're afraid of offending people. We're afraid people will feel judged. I want to talk quickly about gently correcting language, because in our programs, many of our students want to learn what is the inclusive way to refer to certain groups of people or use certain words. So I use a few words that I hear in my work a lot where I'll gently correct people. They say, oh, does Intercombia work with illegal immigrants? And I'll say, the term we prefer to use is undocumented. We don't like to refer to people as illegal. And people usually say, oh, thank you, I forgot. That just came out wrong, but thank you for correcting me. A lot of people say American when they're referring to people born in the US, or they refer to, American values. But what we prefer to say is US American when we're specifically referring to people or values that are talking about the United States, because there's a big continent below us called South America, and that also has the word America in it. There's Central America, which also has the word America in it, and a lot of them consider themselves American. So it's not just US America. It's not just, America is not just the US. So that's a conversation I've been having recently with people, and it's been interesting. And another word is assimilation. So a lot of people say, oh, this work, you're working to assimilate immigrants. Even stuff from the federal government is like, here's a grant to help assimilate immigrants. And, I take the opportunity to say, we don't use the word assimilation. That has a lot of racist history associated with it. Around Black inferiority, about the Indian boarding schools in the US, that was the word used to describe what the goal of was with those. So instead of assimilation, we talk about participation or integration, or a lot of other words that don't carry that racist history. So what is culture? Culture is like an iceberg because we only see a little tip of it. A lot of it's below the surface, right? When we go to a cultural festival, we see the music and the food and the dance and the clothes, but we don't see how people view, life and death and friendship and favors and honesty and relationships, and what you do if you enter a class late, and starting and ending meetings on time, and interruptions and silence and all these other things that we don't see. So we got to talk to people. Culture is a lot of stuff. It's more than just the language and the food and the music. So yeah, and cultural differences shouldn't separate us from each other, but they do. We as humans tend to migrate towards friendships and people and relationships who share as much in common with us as possible. So if we look at these cultural dimensions, a lot of times we just say, like, what's your culture, right? Which is identifying one aspect of this, but we all bring a lot of different dimensions into who we are. So it's our age, it's our race, it's our gender, it's our our political affiliation. It's whether we grew up in a big city or a small town. It's our educational background. It's our socioeconomic status. All of these things make us who we are, and all of those things impact our personality. So our personality is not exclusive of all of these dimensions of our culture. So you can reflect on, which of these dimensions are in my organization, in my staff, amongst my classes, and so on. And I also want to take a second to talk about this, which I hear a lot, like the word culture to be synonymous with nationality or to be synonymous with race, which to me is problematic because culture is more than your race. It's more than your nationality. It's an important component of your culture, but it can be really challenging if someone asks you, what's that like in your culture, right? If someone said, Lee, what's, saying thank you to strangers like in your culture? I'd be like, I don't know which aspect of my culture you're talking about. Are you talking about, my race, my age, my religion, any of these other things? So we need to be a little bit more specific. A question that I encourage teachers to ask in classrooms is, what's that like where you grew up, right? So even asking what's that like in your native country can be challenging, because if we're talking about a country like Mexico, for instance, it's like lots of little countries within a bigger country, because there's rural Mexico, there's urban Mexico, there's north and south are very different. It's like Texas. Texas is like a lot of different countries. You can't say, what's that like in Texas? Well, are you talking about Dallas? You talking about Houston? You talking about Austin? You talking about, so asking like a little more specific question than what's that like in your culture? So that's a piece of cultural humility, is understanding that culture is this complex thing. We like to just, make it simple and easy and put it into, put people into one box, like, oh, Lee, he's this, and Maria, she's this, and Enrique, he's this. But we all bring a lot of multi-dimensional aspects of our culture. So what is cultural competence? Cultural competence is a good thing. It's learning skills and tools that allow us to better interact with people from different cultural and ethnic groups. So it can be very little things like, oh, I learned that in Turkey, it's offensive to show people the bottom of your feet, right? There's like thousands, tens of thousands of little things you can learn about every group of people, around what might be offensive, what's not. I've learned that many of our students come from what we call yes cultures, where they say yes to every invitation, right? They'll never say no to an invitation, no matter what. And I've learned that. So that's a good piece of competence. However, the goal of cultural competence, sounds great, but it might lead us to generalize rather than recognize the uniqueness of everyone. So if we start to say, oh, well, I know that, in Mexico, people do it this way, that's very different from saying, I'm aware of this general difference, but I'm not going to generalize and stereotype about a group of people because I think I know, everything about them. Everybody is a unique individual. So it's good to know these general differences. It's bad to turn those differences into biases and stereotypes and things like that. And in many frequent competency measures, whiteness is what's understood and represented as the norm, right? I see someone shared a very specific example about writing in red pen that's only used when a person is deceased, right? Little things like that can be very important to add to our toolkit. So, and those things are fun. Cultural competence is really like, it's fun to learn all these little differences. However, also another thing about cultural competence is the people who are typically identified as more culturally competent are people who come from high education backgrounds, who've had the opportunity to travel and live around the world and experience lots of different countries and cultures. A lot of our students in our program, they grew up in rural Mexico and they've lived here, and that's it. They haven't had privileges and opportunities to study this in academic settings or travel around the world and things like that. So you can go ahead and share more little specific cultural competence things you've learned in your classes about things like that. Like I learned, in Japan, it could be offensive to stick your chopsticks in your food. That also is a symbol of death, and little thousands of things like that. So what is cultural First, cultural compatibility. That is a blending of cultural competence and cultural humility. That's kind of one of the goals here. So it's not a real word, but it kind of illustrates the synergy between competence and humility, which is what we're shooting for. So what are some steps to practice and model cultural humility in your organization, in a classroom? One is to understand what it is and what it isn't. Two is it's this reflection phase. A lot of it's focused on reflecting, acknowledging your biases, power dynamics, what kind of judgments do I have? And then it's preparing and opening doors for honest dialogues and modeling it as an instructor or as a leader or as a counselor, whatever your role is. And your students don't need to know what this term cultural humility is or what it means or how to define it. It's kind of hard to define. You want to just model it for them, and that's going to increase your ability to have these conversations. So let's get into some specific examples. But first, what is cultural humility? One difference is it's a mindset versus competency, which is a goal. Like competency is I'm going to add to my toolkit as much as possible and learn about interacting with different cultural and ethnic groups. Humility is an ongoing mindset. It's continuous reflection on your biases and how you treat and understand others. It's being aware of power imbalances. So in our programs all have power imbalances because we have teachers and students. We have directors and people who report to directors. So there are power imbalances, and it's important that we are aware of them. I, wasn't aware of it as for a long time. I started our organization when I was 22, and I was the director for 21 years. And it wasn't until the very end that I realized how important the power dynamics were of me being the executive director and other people being underneath me, because I was always like, yeah, but it's, we're a team and we all talk and I've got an open door policy. But there was a lot of dynamics because of that. It's recognizing that no behavior, no culture, no group is superior or inferior. It's curiosity and ongoing learning. So we want to, I like talking about that in like a classroom mantra or something like that, saying, we all want to learn from each other, right? Establishing those expectations and encouraging the curiosity. And finally, humility is about being open about what we haven't learned yet. So that's just general humility, is not thinking, oh, I'm the expert on cultural stuff. I always say nobody's an expert on culture. And anyone who says they're an expert on culture, you shouldn't go to their trainings because they're not humble leaders. So there's always more to learn about culture and about these differences. So self-reflection, that's step 2, and considering power and bias. So the self-reflection is you can, think about those 10 examples we did, the agree and disagree, and what are your instincts, biases, or assumptions about those differences? So when we talked about interruptions, was there something that, you thought? Do you think interrupting is rude? Do you think silence is awkward? Do you think all meetings should start and end on time? Do you have, instincts when people run a meeting over time or show up late? The interruptions one is a big one. I've had very interesting conversations with my staff about that, because some people are like, interruptions are fine. What's the problem? And other people like, oh my God, I hate being interrupted. It's so rude. And you have these very different ways of seeing that. So why do you think interrupting is rude or not? Maybe that has to do with your family status. Did you grow up as an only child, or did you grow up with 10 siblings? That might determine your answer more than anything else on those dimensions, right? More than your nationality, more than your race, but like, how many siblings did you have? Lots of things like that. Your religion might impact your view of silence. Some religions, it's just normal to sit in silence for ceremony for a long period of time. Other people have never done that. And to them, 3 seconds of silence is like, oh my God, I got to jump in and say something. The silence is so awkward. And then think about the dimensions of your individual culture that might play a role in the perspective that you've developed. So what is it? Is your race a factor? Is it your age? Is it your political affiliation? Is it, something else here, your academic background that impacts your perspective of that, immediate judgment or thought you have about a lot of these cultural differences? And again, thinking about the power imbalance, racism history, how that might play a role in some of these examples. So we talked about the what do you do for work example, thinking about time, right? Starting things and ending things right on time. has been typically like a white middle class to upper class way of being successful in our country, but there's a lot of people from different racial and ethnic groups that see time differently, and that's not typically rewarded in our society. So having conversations about those things, even like how you use formal language or informal language, things like that. So talk about it if you feel equipped, do research on it if you don't feel equipped, or don't talk about it if you just want to avoid these conversations altogether. And then finally, it's being prepared to have the open, honest dialogue in your class or with your team. So part of that is sharing your personal experiences. When the teacher or somebody shares first, it can open the door to other people sharing. So you can talk about mistakes you've made or self-reflections that you had. So, for instance, I was taught that it's polite to say thank you for opening a door when someone opens a door for me in public, right? That's just, it's obvious, right? You don't just walk through without saying thank you to someone. They've done a nice little gesture for you. I've learned over the years that that's not the case for everyone, right? I had a teacher say, I've got students from the Middle East who were asking me about this because they were like, why do people say thank you for all these little things, right? And what they learned was that in some cultural groups, you save thank yous for bigger things. You don't need to say thank you for all this little stuff. I've also talked to people who said, I opened a door for an older person once and they were like, thank you, but I could do it myself. Right. So it depends on like a person's sense of independence. And so I've learned that this isn't always the case for everyone, that saying thank you is the right thing to do. Right. So that's, a self-reflection that I've had around that. It's asking questions to your students about what's your experience been with this? What's your experience with eye contact? What's your experience with meetings starting and ending on time? What's your experience with silence? So opening the door for these conversations where students can share their experiences. It's listening without judgment or taking a stance on what's wrong, right, good, bad, polite, or rude, right? We look at this and it's like, obviously, Lee, I'm not going to, say this is polite, this is rude, but I've seen many teachers say, this is the right way to do it, this is the rude way to do it, period, right? That's assimilation. That's not what we're aiming for. We're aiming to have conversations where people are learning from each other and not saying this is right, this is wrong, because we can really alienate our students when we say that. Basically, hey, your way of seeing this for the last 40 or 50 years is the wrong way. Now you have to change, right? But they have to be aware of differences. And I also, talk about negotiable and non-negotiable differences. So a non-negotiable difference is like, hey, you live in the US now, and this is how it works if you get pulled over by the police, right? You can't get out of the car. You can't argue with the police. You can't do these things, or really bad things happen. That is different from like cultural differences about, hey, I invite you to a party at my house and it starts at 6. What time are you going to show up? Or things like entering the class late, or things like eye contact, right? Those aren't going to land you in jail. There can be consequences, but it's not the same as, the non-negotiable stuff. Like you have to be on time for court appointments, or you're going to miss that court appointment, or a parent-teacher conference, or those things. So it's important to make that distinction between what are, life-changing differences versus cultural differences that can be seen as just simply different. And again, be open and honest about what you haven't learned yet. This is tough because some of our students are like, you're the teacher, you should have all the answers, but that's also a cultural difference. We are people. We don't have all the answers, and our students need to know that. So some case studies that we get into in a longer training, but we only have 7 minutes here, are, you're presenting a culture tip that talks about how in the US, many people consider it polite to say thank you when people open a door for you in public. I just want to tell you a very subtle difference of how to introduce that. All right, so it's kind of written here. So one way of saying this is it's polite to say thank you in the US when people open a door for you. Option 2 is say many people consider it polite to say thank you when they open a door for you. So did you see that little difference, right? It's good, or it's rude, or it's right, or it's wrong to do this, versus many people see it this way. That opens the door for the students to still, do it the way that they want to do it. But now they know that many people see it this way, right? Another example is a student in your upper level class makes a comment like, I noticed that African Americans in the US use bad grammar, right? This has come up. I've heard this. Other teachers have heard this. Students are interested in this. And a teacher can respond by saying, you can't say that. That's offensive. or you can have a conversation about different uses of English. Somebody said there are many beautiful Englishes. You could talk about, you can use this as an example to talk about the civil rights movement and other things. So there's different ways that you can model humility when a student asks a question that can be seen as offensive by people. You're talking about eye contact in the US, right? Again, a subtle difference. In the US, it's important to make eye contact because people see that as a sign of honesty, you're paying attention, and these other things, versus in the US, many people see eye contact as this, okay? Again, it's not, you need to do this. It's in the US, many people see it this way. So that's one simple way you can model cultural humility, is not saying you need to do it this way, this is the right way, this is the wrong way, to for many people, they see it this way, all right? And then another situation, you invite your students on a field trip, half of them show up, they all said they were going to go, but how do you respond to that, right? Do you say, hey, I was so disappointed, you said you were going and you didn't show up, right? Whereas a lot of people, again, come from yes cultures where if you invite them to something, it's more important to say yes in the moment than to give an honest response that, hey, I want to go, but I have this other commitment, I can't go. So it's like, what? Why didn't you could have just told me that. Well, in my perspective, that's actually the rude thing to do. So you have a conversation about that. This is a tool that we could talk about for a couple hours. I just wanted to introduce. It's very powerful, called the ladder of inference. And basically the idea here is that when we see a behavior, when we see somebody, when we see anything, we just select a little bit of the data, but we form a bunch of conclusions and take action and make assumptions according to just this little, just not the complete data. And we do that all the time. And on our teams, we say, oh, so-and-so is being a perfectionist. Well, what are the facts? How did you get to that point? So-and-so is really upset about this. Really? What are the facts that you can point to, and how, what's the story you've created? So that's just a tool I encourage you to check out on your own. So before class, ask yourself, what do I hope to learn, and how am I going to encourage my students to teach me something new? That's a way you can enter every class with humility, right? Instead of, here's what I'm going to teach my students today, say, what are my students going to teach me? Okay. And create that mutual learning. And then after class, ask yourself, what have I learned? What emerged for me? So I am going to put in the chat a copy to the link, so you can, if you're interested in getting a PDF of this presentation, there's our contact information there, our website. You can take a picture of that QR code. And in the last couple minutes, I want to have everybody write in the chat something that you learned from this, or something that resonated, or something that you knew but was reinforced. A lot of this is not new for all of you, but it can help to hear it again and practice it again. It's not something that is natural for us to approach these things with humility. It's natural for us to approach differences with judgment and with biases. And so I'd love to see a bunch of little things in the chat about what you are taking away from this training, something you want to try. There's 30 of you, so I hope that there's a few things you're walking away with. Someone said cultural approaches I never thought of. Thank you. What else? What else? The iceberg analogy, that we only see a little bit of it, but most of culture is below the surface. Someone said, yeah, changing their words to American systems, to US American systems. Cool. Understanding the definition of cultural humility. Someone said, I like the last two questions to enter class with. What am I going to learn from class? What am I going to learn from my students? What have I learned? Some active practices of humility in addition to some reflective ones. Yeah, so some of this, again, is mindset. Some of this is like asking those questions, like very specific things. How do I introduce this difference? Another person says, asking myself what I'm going to learn from my students before class. Excellent. So yeah, again, it takes some discipline. What effect does my correcting grammar have? Yeah, the grammar one's a tough one. And I get this question a lot around, how much of the proper grammar do we teach our students? And I think it's important for our students to learn the different ways they might hear grammar. And they have to recognize that, there isn't a right or wrong way, but that in certain settings, formal grammar is what's more rewarded. And that is a systemic thing. That's also kind of, you can say that's systemic inequity as well, because some people's grammar doesn't get rewarded in society, even though they're extremely intelligent, but the way they talk makes people uncomfortable. And I see a movement happening to, respect different Englishes more. I think we're at the beginning of that movement, but I think there's still a long way to go. So yeah, classism is a part of that. Someone else said being humble and accept that we also learn from our students. Excellent. Somebody said the difference between saying many people versus all people. Yep, again, that real subtle difference. And I think that's it. So thank you, everyone.